we've got a special guest for you today. We're going to be talking to Mitch Joel. Mitch, as I was saying there, you couldn't hear. Mitch has founded a few businesses. He's had great success in the marketing space. He's a visionary kind of guy. He's got a couple of books with some great names, 6 Pixels of Separation and Control Alt Delete. I love that one. And we're going to be talking today about how can you find ways to get more unlimited customers? How can you get more customers? How can you take your marketing efforts and kind of cut through the noise? And what should you be looking at? And what's going on in tech? And what do you need to be worried about with your consumers? So lots of stuff. But here's the bonus, guys. So we're going to be talking to Mitch. Mitch is also going to be a speaker at the Car Wash Show in Las Vegas in just a couple of weeks. I'm super excited for that. I hope you are as well. So without further ado, friends, let's kick this show off the right way, and let's bring in Mitch Joel. Mitch, welcome to the program.
Great to see you, Matt. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Hey, this is going to be super fun because I love to talk about technology, whether it works or whether it doesn't. And you know all about these things, so this is going to be awesome.
Yeah, it's fun to do. I've done podcasts, done my own for a long, long time, so always happy to join in. And super excited to be in Vegas. It'll be my first time in Vegas since this whole pandemic. I was going to say started. I don't even know where we're at with it, but since pandemic.
Yeah, we're somewhere in the middle. I don't know. Maybe we're still at the beginning. Maybe it's over. Who knows? Who knows what's going on? Well, look, I want to start out with a little bit of definition for folks, right? So you've been talking a little bit lately about this concept of the Great Compression. And we've got lots of these phrases running around, right? Great Resignation, there's skimpflation, which is a whole thing. Great Compression. Can you just kind of define that for us so we can kind of level set this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you go back to March of last year, there was definitely a thought that we might be heading towards this Great Depression. And what we've ultimately seen is a K-shaped recovery. But it's a pretty dramatically shaped K, I think. There's some organizations and individuals that have done exceptionally well. And then we have a massive amount of people on the other side of that K who've, fallen further and farther down. And that creates, a pandemic of its own sort in terms of the world. But we haven't seen a Great Depression in terms of breadlines, everybody unemployed, which could have been and might have been a probable outcome of the world as we've seen it. We're in bizarre times economically, as I'm sure people in the car wash business know. Fortunate enough, considered an essential service, but I'm sure business was not as brisk as it was just because you're cleaning ambulances and squad cars and things like that in a world where people were staying home for a long period of time. That has to impact the P&L. And when I talk about the Great Compression, to me, it was just a culmination of my 20 plus years in this space of seeing technology and innovation, where it felt like everybody was finally doing the things that I and many others in my group have been talking about. The fact that we're in a place where we are digital first, the fact that we're in a place where we are mobile and on the go, even when we're at home. We're in a place where we had finally our youngest of youngest and our eldest of elderly truly connected. And then we also saw it trickle down and up in terms of technology and innovation to very small mom and pop type businesses. And then even the big players, the large and medium-sized enterprises, really figuring out what transformation looks like. So whatever path they were on, it compressed immediately, while at the same time, they were having to adapt to whatever it is they were doing, which again, in my presentation, I'll talk about this in Vegas, this idea of forced innovation.
That's interesting. And we've seen that forced innovation in the car wash industry because of what consumers have been starting to expect, right? I mean, they want contactless payment. They want to pay with mobile apps. They want to do all of these things. And that change, like you're saying, it's been forced on us, which is a good thing. I mean, this industry is growing. You were talking about the economic impacts of the kind of COVID pandemic on the industry. And it was really fascinating to kind of see that it started out, it was a little brutal, right? Like everybody was kind of shutting down and trying to figure it out. And then guess what? Car washing became like the one normal thing that you could still do. So customers were coming with different expectations, right? So let's talk a little bit about what's changing or what you might see changing in the retail space with those consumer expectations. If I'm a customer and I'm walking in, what am I looking for? What's changed in my mind and what I want in that kind of retail experience?
Well, you touched on some of it, and I would summarize it by saying it's gone from being experiential to being more transactional. which is when you really think about it, what we've seen in digital platforms for the past 20 years, they've been lacking on the experience side, but very high on the transactional speed, contactlessness of it. And to me, when we talk about, I mean, let's broaden it into the world of retail. What we're really talking about is the manifestation of this term omni-channel that we've been saying and talking about again for 10 plus years. This idea that if digital is more transactional and easier, how do we make the physical place more transactional like that? And if the physical places were more experiential, how do we create a better experience for our customer? How is that transforming onto the live digital platforms as well? So that to me is a real, I hate the word convergence, but it's the actual convergence of the things we've been talking about forever, because that's how it had to feel. It couldn't be disconnected. It used to be a world where you would do things like curbside pickup, and it ran almost in its own silo outside of the physical store where you were picking it up from, like different systems.
Yeah.
I got to return this. And like it suddenly, oh, you did it through curbside and that's actually the online channel and all of that confusion. And the reality here is there was this need because of survival, which again, I'll talk about my 3S's live in Vegas. I hope everyone comes down. But this moment of survival where places, whether it's car washes or other retailers, were trying to figure out what will it take to keep them coming in and feeling safe and protected. The challenge on the horizon is, do we go backwards? Or are we able to maintain that level of service, that level of newness, and add it into what we were doing before to create new opportunities? And again, to me, the main crux of the things I'm going to talk about is that idea of what are some of the technologies we've seen out in the world? How has that changed our consumer behavior? And then what does that mean in terms of things we could do within our own business or businesses in the car wash industry? And as we're seeing, because of this moment of survival that so many of these businesses transform through, it actually is doable. But again, it was forced. So now that it's forced and it was done, are you going to revert, or are you going to figure out potentially there's a new business model here, there's a new opportunity here? And that's the real spirit of what we're going to do in Vegas.
Yeah. Hey, Mitch, you're as you were kind of explaining that, a couple of things came to mind for me. One of which is, in this industry, obviously it's a growing industry. There's a lot of companies that are getting bigger, 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 bigger. And in theory, for them, being able to adopt technology is going to get simpler, right? They're going to be able to scale that a little easier. That just makes sense. They're going to have some economies of scale in what they're doing with that. Whereas that initial investment for someone that's maybe 3 or 4 locations is a little harder. If I'm in that smaller bucket of people, how can I make sure that I am finding the right technology, or like watching the right things to invest in for my consumer experience so that I can kind of keep up?
One is, don't believe that you're at a disadvantage, because I don't think you are. If anything, the pandemic proved that if you need to adapt, you can adapt and you will adapt. So if we take anything away from that moment, I would say absolve yourself of this idea that it's easier for big. I would argue it's harder for big. It's harder for big because they have legacy, they have investment, they have infrastructure. It's easier for smaller because there's less of a hill to climb to get to that point and get to that way of being. So I don't really 100% look at it in that same perspective. And I want to go back. What, you had another point that you wanted me to answer?
Yeah, it was just where do I look, right?
Oh, exactly. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
So where do you look? One of the other things that happens in this economy, and this happened before the pandemic, is it seemed like there were many developers figuring out platform specific by industry. And what I would say is, again, hopefully they'll be showing up at the event. Hopefully they'll be walking the floor. What makes it truly amazing for me as somebody who invests in technology as well is to not only see all of these little apps and tools and software packages be available, a lot of them being developed for exactly that small, medium-sized businesses, but also how niche specific they are to your actual industry. So again, I'm not going to sit here on a perch and claim that I have a lot of depth of knowledge of what software and technologies and apps are being developed for the car wash industry, but I can tell you that they are being done and that they are happening, and that even if they are not, that there are many developers who are exclusively focused on that. So, again, I've been on the road for the past couple of weeks, so things are opening up a little bit, which gives me time to sit in hotel rooms, which gives me time to watch TV a little bit, see some of the commercials that are happening. And I was actually amazed to see how many software or app packages have been developed, in particular targeted right to small businesses. So pay attention, do your surfing, do your checking out. Did I just say surfing? That's like a pretty old term. Like I'm really showing my age.
Yeah.
But the other thing I would say is look at the storytelling channels of these businesses too. I'm a real big fan of YouTube, and I have been for a long time. Any business, any piece of software you're looking to invest in, there are usually multitudes of influencers or reviewers online really going in depth with tutorials, with unboxings, with reviews, and look for the ones that have, substantive amount of subscribers, real comments and followers. Usually they're people you could even reach out to and say, hey, if I wanted to know more information about this, who can I connect to? I'm in the middle of building my next startup, and it's very tech focused. And even I'm learning in the process for anything in terms of payments, in terms of where digital assets get stored, in terms of development. I just can't believe, as someone who's been born and bred in bits here and been part of this forever, the amount of new platforms and softwares that are accessible and very reasonable to small businesses, because the whole SaaS model,
Yeah.
right, this software as service, this cloud-based technology is really powerful. So some of it you're paying small monthly fees for, some of it is by seat. There's just so many interesting models as well that will just make it beneficial to any car wash operator.
Well, and it's, for the longest time, there wasn't anything out there, or what was there didn't necessarily talk to each other in a way that made sense for the standard car wash operator, right? You had to build your own system,
Yeah.
and then it's like, oh my gosh, now I'm so heavily invested in this, and then I got to update it to keep it up, and it just didn't make sense. But now there are, like you're saying, there are so many opportunities and so many tools and things that can actually integrate with one another to help make that business better. I think it's super exciting for the industry.
You look at things like even CRM, and
Yeah.
historically, multiple companies would be on different versions of it. You would be hiring third-party consultants and developers to add in the stack that you need. And now what I feel, it's almost like a pie where it's been cut up into so many pieces that you can build your own based off of the flavors and sizes that you need. Not all of it's perfect, not all of it is off the shelf, but it gives you more choice and selection and makes it more accessible, because you're right, taking on one of those major CRM platforms with proper integration and developers, it was just simply out of the reach of any small and maybe even medium-sized business at the time.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, that's the nice thing about the way that things are evolving, right? Everything is going so fast that now people have access that didn't have it before. Let's talk a little bit about the future, shall we? So we talked a little bit about, like, what's kind of going on now and what consumers are kind of starting to expect and how you kind of got to be watching that. We also talked a little bit about how you kind of need to look out and evaluate and look at all the systems kind of going on and keep your kind of keep your head on a swivel, as my high school football coach used to say. So we've got that figured out. Now let's talk about, like, what's coming. Like, what are we not seeing, right? Like, we're swiveling, we're looking, but what's coming? What do you think is in the future here in the next couple of years?
So some of the things that I think about when I think about what's coming is, what are we laughing at now? And thankfully, there's a lot to laugh about now. If you look at things like NFTs, non-fungible tokens, people paying 60, 50 million for a JPEG, an image of something, that seems absurd. But if you walk that down a little bit and think about this idea that suddenly we're able to place scarcity on digital assets in a world where none of them were, right? If I send you an MP3 file or a movie file, you don't have a copy of it. You have as verified as a version as I do. It's the same code, it's the same integrity. There's no degradation through the transfer. But with things like NFTs, we could assign one specific file, an image, a music file, whatever, as the one, giving it essentially provenance. Now, again, when you're thinking about things like loyalty cards or different levels of membership, what could be done at a bigger level with potentially an NFT type of tokenization? So that's one side of it. When you talk about tokenization, we can all go Bitcoin crazy and look at GameStop and meme stocks in the whole world. But actual currency, if currency does lean to be more digitally based, more unregulated in the sense of it being covered by an actual government and being decentralized, what are the impacts? What are the types of payment methods you should be looking at or considering? Another area of interest. Again, we're all kind of hemming and hawing this week about Mark Zuckerberg and the word meta,
Meta, yeah.
and the word metaverse. But I don't think it's a far cry from the world we're at, whether you are old enough to remember things like Second Life, or if you have kids
Yeah.
presently living in places like Minecraft and Roblox. This is what's happening. They are living in these virtual worlds. And there's no doubt that we're going to have to move from this two-dimensional introspection to a more three-dimensional one. So, swiveling your head, which I love that analogy, is really true. And I tend to look at the things that we're making the most fun of now. That tends to be the easiest and simplest way to think about it.
That's really fascinating. I love that way of thinking about it because it's true, right? Like, how many things did you think, oh my gosh, that's so ridiculous? And then you're like, oh, that's what we do every day. Okay.
Listen, people were laughing about meta and metaverse and what does it mean? And I'm like, I remember people laughing at me because I had internet access, or I had a computer in my house, or I was looking at emails on a phone, or the fact that I had a mobile phone. I mean, if I look at any technology, why would I want to post pictures of what I'm eating?
Right.
We just keep doing this over and over again. And then when it becomes habitual, we look at it and wonder, why did I ever deny it? Or why did I ever not believe in it? Because it seems absurd. If it didn't seem absurd, everybody would already be doing it.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so I want to then go to, okay, so we find the things we're laughing at. How do we make sure that our business is set up in a way that we can pivot and like be ready for those things, right? Because if we're pretty heavily laden, you had talked about like bigger companies, they've got a lot of infrastructure. It's, you're moving the Titanic. How do we be ready?
It's an attitude. I mean, if you decide that we are going to be led by technology, it's not hard to be ready. You look at companies like Google, who have come out and said that they are an AI first company, an artificial intelligence first company. What does that mean? That sounds absurd. What they're saying is we're ready for a moment in time where algorithms are going to be self-learning and adding new form factors. And if you fast forward to yesterday, I mean, it's true. Currently, when they're doing evaluations on things like their algorithms, more often than not, these very nerdy scientists are very forthcoming in saying, we don't really even know what the algorithm is doing right now, or how it's learning, or what it's doing. We programmed it to learn a certain way. And now it's doing things we could never have imagined, obviously, because that's what the technology does. So it's attitudinal in everything. If you're, my customers don't use this, or they're not connected, I would say just look at what they're doing when they're waiting for their car. They're on their phone all the time. So they are connected. And again, through this great compression, what we saw is the amplification and usage of that. So if they're doing that, the questions you should ask yourself, like even immediately, would be, well, are we more web-based? Like when we think about digital technology, are we developing for the web or for mobile? My guess is if you're a car wash operator or dealing in that industry, your primary customer is probably way more mobile than they are desktop. And so there you are developing your new website or your social platform or whatever, loyalty in a web infrastructure, when in reality, it's 100% mobile. I mean, my loyalty cards that I love and admire the most are the ones that are purely mobile. If I think about things like, we have Ticketmaster for my ticketing information, or even my airline loyalty, the card is physically the digital mobile application. And that creates more loyalty for me. And if you don't want to look at me, just look at things like Apple in terms of what they're doing in terms of services and how much money it's generating for them, which again, I've got some great information that we're going to share in Vegas all about that world.
I love that. You guys, you got to join us in Vegas. I mean, that's the moral of this story. That's where you get all the really good stuff. We're giving you like some stuff to get your brain going. But
I'm trying not to give it all away.
We don't want to give it all away.
Some great stuff.
Yeah, totally. Hey, if you guys want to watch, if you want to get that information, you got to come to Vegas. You got to buy a premium pass, and you got to go to Mitch's session. I've got one more question that I want to ask Mitch today, which is what I like to ask everybody on the show. What is one thing, Mitch, that I can do now that will make me better tomorrow? One thing.
Yeah, easy. Read. Yeah. And I don't mean tweets, and I don't mean Facebook pages. I mean books. Books, like they were written so long ago, and now with supply chain shortages, how long does it take to get? You can learn so much by really spending time over a longer period of time, maybe in smaller chunks, and not just reading, but taking notes and thinking about it. And it doesn't even have to be about technology and innovation. For me, when people ask me, what is the one thing? I'm reading a lot. I'm taking a lot of notes. I got over here. I couldn't even show you how many different types of notebooks I physically write. Yes, I have Evernote and technology to help, but I'm using mostly non-tech based stuff to really spend time with it, because the feed can keep going and then the saved articles can keep going. But again, that physical time over a longer period of time in little short bursts, to me, just opens up a whole bunch of new synapses for sure.
Yeah, that's great advice. I mean, and especially in the car wash industry, when you think about what you're doing all day, if you're working at the wash or you're on site, that's one kind of way to work, and that's one kind of way to engage your brain. But to then go and like sit down and like be focused and quiet, that's a whole different thing. So things are going to fire in different ways. You're going to think differently, and you're going to get some really great ideas. I love that advice.
I mean, look, we've been learning all this since we were kids. You have work, and then you have homework.
Yeah.
Do your homework. This is the homework.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Well, hey, Mitch, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really looking forward to having you in Vegas.
Yeah, I can't wait. It was great meeting you, Matt, and I'll see you all in Vegas, I hope, for sure.
Yeah, we will be there. Hey, if you guys are watching at home and you want more great stories, more programs like this, you know where to do that. That's at carwashmagazine.com. And friends, we will be doing this program live and in the flesh in Las Vegas for 2.5 days with you. So come by, say hello. And when you're out there, there's just one thing you've got to do, and that is keep it clean.
I'm just having a